Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Let's get stuck into the Brexit. I have no idea what happens next. And anyone who tells you that they do is either making it up, fibbing, or hoping to get lucky. I have absolutely no idea what happens next. I've also got very tired of hearing myself boast about how all of my predictions up until point X have turned out to be true. So what, mate? Seriously, so what? It doesn't matter. It doesn't change anything, does it? You predict something terrible is going to happen and it still happens. It doesn't make you a genius, necessarily. And it certainly doesn't add any aid or assistance to the aftermath. So I have no idea what happens next. Genuinely no idea. We've got this ridiculous election coming up tomorrow, about which I'm still not entirely sure what I can and can't say, so I generally err on the side of saying next to nothing. It is, I think, fair to say that nobody's going to get 52% or higher, which means in the context of that original referendum result, next to nothing changes. You have Theresa May desperately trying to usher through another iteration of her so-called deal, which isn't a deal, it's a withdrawal agreement. It's the terms and conditions under which we would then begin negotiating a deal. It's astonishing. And as someone who has, for good or for ill, emerged as, stroke being cast as, something of on one side, a voice of reason in the context of facts and evidence, and on the other side, an irredeemable traitor who has no concept of the national interest whatsoever because he keeps talking about facts and ignores our feelings. I don't know that the needle's going to move much more now. It's so bizarre. It's so bizarre. And do you know who I envy? I think I envy now the hard Brexiters. I presume some of you, most of you, are uncomfortable with some of the running mates that you have, some of the people you've ended up on the same side of history as. I presume plenty of people who still want to leave the European Union with no deal are as repulsed by that breaking point poster as I am. But I don't think anything's going to nudge anyone anymore. It's as if this deal, this agreement that Theresa May cobbled together yesterday seems to be the apotheosis of the last 3 years. It's a desperate attempt to give everybody something which ends up, unless something very, very unexpected happens in the next couple of weeks, she tries to give everybody something and ends up annoying everyone. Because what? Because it's all or nothing? Because the biggest mistake she made was to treat that 52% mandate as if it was close to 100%, to somehow veer immediately towards things that were never on the ballot paper, things that were never voted for or suggested. Precisely nobody, whatever you might be reading or hearing, anyone telling you that the phrase "no deal is better than a bad deal" was in the public space before the result came in. Anyone telling you that is lying. Anyone that tells you that they said it themselves is lying through their teeth. And yet, there we are. Apparently, we all voted for this thing that they told us couldn't possibly happen. And I'm not even... What's the word I want? I'm not even necessarily as critical as I once was of people who now insist that they definitely voted for something they swore blind couldn't happen. Because it's as if I'm trying to kind of make an omelette with conkers. Do you know what I mean? The psychological processes that lead people to that conclusion are valid and valuable. They're human. And I suppose that they're honest in a way. And if you can't get your head around the psychology that sees people move in the space of 6 months to literally laughing at the suggestion that it was going to come down to no deal or no Brexit, to now claiming that they wanted no deal all along, I don't think I've got the right to insult you anymore, have I? I seek to understand, and I don't. I do understand what was in yesterday's reiteration of this ludicrous withdrawal agreement. And by ludicrous, I mean Theresa May labours still under the illusion that that reason will somehow prevail. What was she waiting for? 0345 6060973 is the number you need. So this is what she offered, an alternative to replace the backstop by December 2020. That has been essentially cut and pasted from Ian Duncan Smith's Fantasy Football League. There is absolutely no evidence anywhere that alternative arrangements exist. All of the people qualified to provide alternative arrangements at the British border in Ireland say, God, it's Groundhog Day again, isn't it? They all say it doesn't exist. The weirdest bit for me, and I have now officially given up on expecting pennies to drop when I point stuff like this out, but the weirdest bit for me was that simple observation that the people who said it would be really easy to solve that problem were the same people who went absolutely bonkers when the agreement incorporated a promise to leave things as they are until that solution has been provided. I still feel we haven't got that as pithy as it needs to be, even though I think we're probably wasting our breath. That, for me, would have been a moment, I don't even want to say in a rational universe anymore, because that's a sort of insult, isn't it? That's an implicit insult. But that should have been the moment where everybody went, huh? Everyone went a little bit Scooby-Doo. Oh? That's the point, isn't it? Here is a person who is telling you it's really, really easy to solve the problem of the British border in Ireland. I don't care whether it's Ian Duncan Smith or Jacob Rees-Mogg or Liam Fox or Mark Francois or Nadine Dorries, whichever one of them it is. Here is somebody telling you it's really, really easy to do. They can't tell you how they're going to do it yet. It's like there's a plan, but it goes to a different school. But they are looking you in the eye. They're looking all of us in the eye and saying, that's really easy, OK? I'm just working my way through the 10 major changes that Theresa May cobbled together yesterday. And the same people who looked us in the eye, I didn't trust them. I'm just intrigued by people who did and still do. They looked us in the eye and they said, it's really easy to solve this problem. We can't tell you how we're going to do it. That's why this phrase alternative arrangements has assumed so much life in British public debate. We can't tell you how we're going to do it, but I swear to you it's really easy, right? To which I think we would all respond by going, oh, OK, that's cool. Well, if you can't tell us what it is, then I guess we're going to have to agree with the Irish request, and of course, Ireland backed up by 26 other EU member countries. I guess we're going to have to agree with their request that until we've shown them what this solution is that you say is really easy, we'll have to leave things pretty much as they are. And that in the context of the discussions that we're having, involves a customs union that covers the whole of the United Kingdom. And nothing moved, no needle nudged, no pendulum swung even a scintilla. I'll say it again, that person there told you it was really easy, so they said, oh good, let's leave things as they are until this really, really easy solution has been explained and implemented, and that's when they went bonkers. The backstop, that's point number 2. Great Britain's border rules will stay aligned with Ulster, is promise number 2, to keep the DUP sweet. A final say for MPs, a final treaty between the UK and the EU must go to an MP's vote. That seems to me to be probably the least controversial bit in it, because that is what this was supposed to be all about, a sovereign parliament. Now, you know and I know that our parliament was always sovereign, but some people still persist in believing that it somehow wasn't. And again, they seem to be the same people who will be angriest about the suggestion that any final treaty has to be voted for by MPs. Yeah. We're only up to 3. There's 7 more. I don't know if I'm going to pick my way through them one by one, or whether you're going to call me and hopefully inject a little bit of nitroglycerin into my fuel tank. Is that the right word? Is it nitro in Fast and Furious? Is that what you do with your boosts, your turbos? I don't know. 10:15 is the time. 0345 6060973. I'll carry on picking through this list, but what I want you to do is ring me now and tell me what you think is going to happen next. Not in the context of tomorrow's result, tomorrow's election result. If no one gets more than 52% tomorrow, it doesn't really change anything. But and again, if you hear me boasting about the fact that I predicted it coming down to no deal or no Brexit before anybody else did, then please feel free to give me a metaphorical slap. Even I'm sick of that now, honestly. And it was right, though. And thirdly, of course, question becomes what will happen next? Theresa May will be gone by... I'm off on holiday next week. I'd be amazed if she's still Prime Minister when I get back. But as I said at the outset, I have no idea what happens next. She'll be replaced by Boris Johnson or some other Conservative with a record of having voted for Brexit, even if it's Boris Johnson, who very nearly didn't. You remember, he had 2 columns written. There's the needle, it hasn't nudged at all. I'll say it again, he had 2 columns written. That's how trustworthy he is. He tossed a coin. Oh, yes, but I trust him. OK. So he will somehow go and do something that Theresa May couldn't do? Is that what people are signing up for? The idea that Boris Johnson will go and say the same things in a slightly different accent and with a different hairstyle, and the European Union will react completely differently from how they did when Theresa May did it? What do you think her biggest mistake was? 0345 606 0973. What do you think will happen next? 0345 606 0973. And nitrous oxide, thank you. It's good to know someone's paying attention. Keith. What do you think will happen next? What do you think our biggest mistake was? And I don't think you'll have a crack at this one because it's a bit like asking you to explain quantum theory. But how the hell did it come to this? How did it come to this? This ludicrous impasse. Very, very angry people talking about feeling betrayed, talking about feeling ignored, dispossessed, and then all of the people claiming to represent them lying through their teeth about the promises that were made during the course of the referendum. I think I might be slightly ashamed to be British this morning. And that's not a nice feeling. How have we allowed ourselves, our wonderful sovereign parliament, our magnificent functioning democracy, how have we allowed it to be reduced to this? How has this happened? I wonder if you can answer that in a sentence. If you can, I'll give you the money myself. Do you understand why she went in so hard so quickly, as if that mandate was for 100%? Brexit means Brexit nonsense. Remember, we sat here and said, what does that mean? But it worked with a certain constituency, and arguably that constituency have still got their hand on the steering wheel. So what was Theresa May's biggest mistake? 0345 606 0973. What do you think is going to happen next? And if you really want to get meta about it, then how did it come to this? I'll just read out a quick text, because then we can use it as a nod towards everybody who gets in touch with similar sentiments. This is from Kez in West London. James, you, like a lot of the establishment, just don't get it. We don't care how difficult it is. We don't care how bad it will be for the economy. We don't care whether certain aspects are possible or not. We just want to cut all ties with the EU and leave. Mate, I do get it. I get it completely. I understand what you have just said, and I think you believe it to be true. But my job is to say why. And when I say, why do you want to cut all ties with the EU and leave, every single thing you say will be untrue. And that's not your fault. 30 years have been spent pouring lies and poison into your ears. And that's what it has come to. I get it better than anyone, because I've been doing this every day for years. I get it better than everyone. You can tell me what you think, and it feels like a valid position. But as soon as I say, why do you think it, then it all falls apart, and you just go away and get really, really cross with me, which is fine. I take my medicine. But let's not kid ourselves. The idea that people understand what cutting all ties with the EU and leaving would mean or entail is pie in the sky. And the only people telling you that it could work out anything other than appallingly are the same people that promised you blind we would never leave with no deal because... And then you insert your own little favourite aphorism here. They need us more than we need them. The German car industry wouldn't countenance it. It'll be the easiest deal in human history. We could be like Norway. We could be like Switzerland. And they're all lying now. Neil's in Wells in Somerset. Neil, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I'd just like to talk about all the hot air that's been discussed over the last 24 hours about the withdrawal agreement. It seems to me that it's perfectly clear that the withdrawal agreement can't be changed, and therefore all the discussion is really about the political declaration.
Well, yes, sorry, you're right. They're kind of linked to each other, aren't they? When I use the phrase withdrawal agreement, I'm incorporating both of them. But I think you're right. I don't think it can be changed, which means what would a different Conservative leader be able to do?
Well, nothing, and that's the issue, isn't it?
Yes.
I think the EU has already said they will talk about the political declaration as and when the withdrawal agreement's been signed. That's clearly not going to happen. There's no way this vote's going to go through the House, and so
no way at all.
I just can't see how he can go through because there's no support for it from the people that want to remain in the European Union.
It's amazing how many of them have changed their minds and then changed them back again while insisting furiously that the public should never, ever, ever be allowed the right to change their mind. Did Rees-Mogg vote for it or against it last time, Neil?
Well, Rees-Mogg voted, in the very last vote, he voted against it, but previous ones he's voted for the deal.
And now he's going to vote against it again?
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Boris Johnson Boris Johnson flip-flopped as well, didn't he, on this?
Yeah, well, they've all flip-flopped. I mean, they've got no backbone, and so all the ERG will vote against it, Labour will vote against it, the Lib Dems, the SNP, and so on. So that I just don't see any way that it can go through the House, and so it seems to me the only way out of this is that Theresa May will go at sometime in June, and one assumes that Boris Johnson will replace her.
I think she could be gone by June, mate. I think if they come in single figures tomorrow, then she could be gone by June.
Well, yeah, by June, I think that's probably right. Let's assume that Boris Johnson will become the next Prime Minister, which is probably quite likely.
And that means Boris Johnson would be appointed Prime Minister by people who have paid to be members of the Conservative Party.
Correct.
And that's what they meant when they told us we'd be taking back control and being more democratic.
Well, we're taking back control of nothing, as far as I can work out. So it seems to me that he will try and force through a hard Brexit, which will be a complete disaster for the country. And if that happens, I believe there'll be a vote of no confidence in the House, and one assumes that the people on the centre of...
Well, hang on. Before the vote of no, I think we're going to do this for quite a long time. So if you're waiting to talk, don't worry about me speaking to Neil for longer than the average phone-in show does, because before there's a vote of no confidence, Johnson will do what? Go to Brussels claiming that he can somehow shake them down differently, that there'll be a different outcome?
Yeah, absolutely. He'll go to Brussels, assume he can get a different outcome, and I think that's highly, highly unlikely. And therefore, one assumes that when we're due to crash out at the end of October, he will either wait for that or try and force it through the House in the meantime. And I just don't believe that the House of Commons as a whole will support it. So I can only see this ending up, to be honest, as a vote of no confidence in the Conservative government sometime...
Led by Boris Johnson and a general election before Christmas, which will be fought between who? So Johnson could be Prime Minister for about 3 months, for about as long as it takes him to finally acknowledge reality, the reality he's been denying since he left Chequers that day, since he walked away after the deal had been written down, pretending that there's a unicorn, pretending that there's sunlit uplands, pretending that this can... I think you underestimate the cynicism and the self-interest of Boris Johnson. I think he might end up throwing his weight behind a no deal if he thinks it'll keep him in Downing Street for a bit longer.
Well, I think he will, but I don't believe there's any support in the House of Commons for that. So, and they're not prepared to put it to the people in a people's vote. So where can it end up? There's only one logical place it can end up, and that's going to be with an election.
And what happens in the election? Nostradamus?
I don't know.
Neil Stradamus?
I have no idea. I mean, I think the end of the two-party system is upon us. But that the end of it might be upon us, but it's unlikely to be administered. The last rites are unlikely to be administered by a general election, because even if the Liberal Democrats have a surge or this Catherine Blakelock's Brexit party does very, very well in a general election, in terms of percentages and numbers, it won't translate into seats unless something quite profound changes. I've forgotten this. Someone reminded me last night. This bloke Matthew Elliott that set up the Taxpayers Alliance and ran Vote Leave also ran the campaign against changes to the electoral system. That's quite a hat-trick, isn't it, of nation-damaging ideologies that have been inflicted upon us by somebody who, as you know, of course, is not compelled ever to reveal the funding of his organisation, Taxpayers Alliance. 28 minutes after 10 is the time. Brian is in Dumbarton. Brian, what's next?
Oh, hey there, Jibs.
Hello, Brian. I'm all good. What's on your mind?
Well, can take talking to you off my bucket list now.
That's the worst bucket list I've ever heard of, mate. Carry on.
It's a very small bucket. Theresa May, you asked what her biggest mistake was.
I did.
I think becoming Prime Minister.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a little bit glib. I meant in terms of decisions she's made and what she has done while being Prime Minister. If you track backwards from the fact that what she has done now in the last 24 hours has delighted precisely nobody and annoyed almost everybody, I'm interested in whether or not that was inevitable or whether or not she bears personal responsibility for the mess that she's ended up in. I'm not entirely sure she does, for the record. I don't really see how things could have shaken down any differently, but I'm more interested in what you think at the moment.
Well, it was predicted that this would be the outcome of a Brexit.
Only by some people predicted it. Other people said we'd be living in clover and feeding our unicorns by now.
Yes, but the character of the people telling us that was never very good to begin with.
Doesn't matter. That's what we think.
I'm an SNP supporter, James.
Yes.
I've stood behind SNP for years now, and they've held a straight line all the way through this. They've been consistent in their approach and what they've been telling the general public that the outcome of Brexit would be. You also asked what would happen next.
I think I know what you're going to say.
You do, don't you?
I do.
I just want to ask, do you think, really, we have a point now? Do you think that the call for Scottish independence carries weight?
Oh, you know I do. I don't want Scotland to be independent because when I'm in Scotland I feel like I'm at home. But the idea of, how we feel looking at Westminster, it's incredible to recognise how aggrieved Scottish people have been. And you only have to go back to 2015 to remember David Cameron getting over the line by essentially casting Scottish people in the same way that UKIP had cast Polish people. Oh, they can't be trusted, we don't like them. Yeah, I mean, we've already established that taking back democracy means our next Prime Minister will be appointed by people who've paid to be members of the Conservative Party. What is that, 50, 60,000 people will choose our next Prime Minister? That's what taking back democracy looks like. It's incredible, isn't it? And getting our country back means cutting it in half. Could it have ended differently? Because, of course, the writing's on the wall for Theresa May. It almost has been since she took the job in many ways, depending on what perspective you had upon the Brexit shenanigans. It was, in my view, always impossible for her to deliver anything that would not necessarily command a majority. I possibly think she might have been able to get something through the House, but she was always going to jettison the support of a significant proportion of people who voted to leave, because there's no way you could keep that lot of leavers happy without really, really hacking off that lot. And again, I keep saying this because it's true, but I appreciate now that it doesn't really change anyone's mind about anything. When Gove and Johnson went through different lobbies on the withdrawal agreement, that was the absolute apotheosis of the observation that she can't do anything that will keep them all happy. Maybe she could have done a better job of not hacking off absolutely everyone. I don't know. So that's question number one. Could she have done anything differently? Stroke, what was her biggest mistake? Because if she couldn't have done anything differently, then changing the driver isn't going to change the destination. Sending Boris Johnson or Dominic Raab or Michael Gove or Sajid Javid or Amber Rudd or... I can't keep up with everyone who's thrown their hat into the ring. But sending them to reopen negotiations hinges upon two presumptions. Number one, the EU must have been lying all along when they said they wouldn't reopen the withdrawal agreement. Every single thing that they've said that has been greeted with claims that they're not telling the truth has turned out to be the truth. But there's a first time. Let's stop clock and all of that. And number two, what would be this deal that Boris Johnson could get that makes... delivers a conclusion different from what Theresa May has received? I don't think there is anything. There literally isn't, which is why there's now so much support for no deal. It's the closest you come to admitting that there never was any deal that was better than remaining. And because no deal is unspecified and unproven, then you can just about cling to the idea that it will be great. Or you're very honest, like my correspondent in Chelsea was it, Kez, who said it doesn't matter how awful it is. We just need to cut all ties and leave. To which I say, why? And there is nothing there. And that's fine too. Julia in Bath tries. She says, the reason I voted to cut ties, all ties with the EU, is because they're not accountable. They do not have their accounts audited, so we have no way of knowing how or where the money is spent. They also waste a tremendous amount of money travelling backwards and forwards to their splendid buildings in Strasbourg and Brussels. Neither of those are lies. They are absolute fact. Just Google it, Julia in Bath. Just Google, is the EU's budget signed off by auditors? Full fact have done it. Auditors say the accounts have been accurate since 2007, but they have historically recorded significant errors in how money is paid since their first audit in 1995. In the most recent year, they found a significant part of the EU's spending was largely error-free for the first time. You don't get that kind of audit in other contexts. And as far as the expenses go, most British MEPs have their accounts and their expenses independently audited. Even Nigel Farage swore blind that he was going to have his accounts independently audited 7 years ago. I'm sure that he's just been too busy. too busy to do it in the interim. So it's all fixable. And I mean, Julia, you're right, neither of those are lies. They are absolute fact. You've never even Googled it. And that's fine too. But Boris Johnson can't change any of these facts. So what happens next? Luke's in Beckenham. Luke, what do you think?
Good morning, James. How you doing?
All good, Luke. What's on your mind?
Listen, I'm weary, I'm fatigued, I'm frustrated by this impasse we're in at the moment. Right? At the end of the day, I think that Theresa May should have resigned after her deal was, or her, what, you know, he called it her deal, if you like. But, you know, she's put it through three times now. And my unfortunate prediction is that Boris Johnson, the man that looks like he's woken up sleep off a hangover and a skip, is going to take over, and he's going to go to the European Union either with WTO terms or no deal.
Well, he has to. He has to. I mean, unless
exactly.
This is, and this is not I told you so. This is please. God, let me be wrong. But back in July of last year, it has to be either no deal or no Brexit, because there is no deal that will keep these people happy, which is why a lot of them...
Would you agree, though, that Labour have been less than useful?
Would I agree? Would I agree, mate? I'd put you on my shoulders and carry you through the crowd as you shouted it through the world's loudest megaphone. Would I agree?
Listen, I'll tell you what, James, right? I've heard you skillfully rebut everyone that can come to you and say, like, why would you want to leave the European Union? Right?
It doesn't matter, though, Luke.
Rebut them.
Doesn't matter.
How about this, though, right? We scored nothing on the Eurovision Song Contest. Everyone moans about our weather, and everyone moans about our food. How about that?
I'll tell you now, we call Brexit off, we'll win it next year.
Cool, last one, James. Have a good day.
We'll do it together, you and me. We'd be like Bros, except we don't even look slightly similar. Chris is in at Alton in Hampshire. Chris, what's going on?
Well, you were asking about how we got here,
yes.
And I think a big chunk of the responsibility lies with journalists who seem to have moved from thinking that they need to give all opinions a chance to be aired to thinking that there's some kind of balance to be had about the facts. And so when there's a dispute about the facts, it's always reported as claim and counterclaim.
Yes, it
and
is.
The job of journalists, it seems to me, is to identify which person has got it wrong. When there's something where it's either true or it isn't, you know, there is no balance to be had. Either it's true or it isn't. And there are some things about which that is the case.
Yeah, well,
So,
I agree with you. I mean, I agree with you completely, but I don't know. There's a bit of chicken and egg here. So did Theresa May, was she enslaved by false equivalence in the media, or did false equivalence in the media create Theresa May's mess?
Well, I think the whole mess is happening because people are abandoning reason.
But this doesn't help, does it?
Then it makes it easier for everybody else to abandon reason. And, you know, I mean, a cite an example this morning, Michael Gove being interviewed.
Yes.
And he said, to have a second vote would be profoundly undemocratic.
As they prepare to have a fourth. As they prefer. Well, of course it's false.
But
I see what you mean.
My point is the person interviewing.
Well, hang on. It wasn't Nick, was it? I don't like people coming on my programme and criticising my colleagues.
No, it was on another channel.
Oh, carry on then. Fill your boots.
But the person interviewing him didn't pull him up on it. And similarly, a bit later on, he
I can guess who it was then.
Later on, he said people knew exactly what they were voting for. But the fact that people knew what they were voting for doesn't matter.
They didn't know what they were. They were sworn. They told them that this couldn't happen. They literally said, people like Gove literally said this couldn't happen. No deal was never, ever, ever mentioned.
But even if people did know what they thought they were voting for, the fact is that we now know that they were voting for different things. Some of them were voting to leave with... to leave
EEA or EFTA, or as Mr. Farage said many times, we could be like Norway, we could be like Switzerland.
Yeah,
He's there on tape saying it.
And it seems to me that we're now in a position where none of the leave options commands the support of more than about a third of the population.
So will they admit their mistake, or will they coalesce around no deal? That's the only mystery left in British politics.
Well, I don't think more than a third will coalesce around no deal.
Really?
So I don't think that's a likely outcome. It's just a question of how long it takes before they admit that we have to consult the people again.
I wish you were right, because it's also a question of whether or not we crash out with no deal by accident.
Well, I think that's unlikely. I don't think the House of Commons...
After the last 3 years, you think that's unlikely?
I don't think the House of Commons, as currently constituted, is going to allow that to happen.
It might not be able to stop it under the legal framework. It actually can't stop it. And the EU could deny us another extension on the perfectly reasonable grounds that we're a bunch of squabbling children who, frankly, should stay as far away as possible from the grown-ups.
But I think the most likely outcome now is another general election.
Yes, but that won't change anything. Because neither Jeremy Corbyn nor Boris Johnson or whoever ends up leader of the Conservative Party can go back to Brussels and get anything different from them.
No, but I think Jeremy Corbyn would be forced, even if he was reluctant, would be forced by the party to run on a manifesto of we'll negotiate the best thing we can and then put it to a confirmatory
So you think
referendum.
the prospect of another referendum has grown in the last 24 hours?
No, but I think that come a general election, Corbyn's hand would be forced by the party
because Labour is very much a Remain party everywhere except at the top.
Yeah, well, at the top and in some MPs who are in seats where their seat really is at threat.
Potentially at threat, although a lot of the psephology suggests that that's been massively inflated and exaggerated as well. Anna Turley MP is a very good person to watch on this. Her constituency, I think, fits very neatly into what you describe, and combinations of her testimony from the doorstep and indeed the local council results earlier this month suggest that narrative's probably flawed as well. Everyone's going for a general election for a variety of different reasons and in expectation of a variety of different outcomes. Again, back to Des, I'm going to read out more of these texts today. I think I've neglected you a little bit. Partly because you make me so sad. I'm not going to lie. When I see people so successfully brainwashed and groomed into saying stuff like this, it just makes me sad. And I think we should all avoid sadness wherever possible. But today I'm embracing the sadness. Here's Des being very sad. There is no deal that will make us financially better off at the present time. Agreed. If that is your concern, it is not mine. I believe we will be socially better off. Also a concern of yours, and yet the financial draws you more. Believe in ourselves and break the addiction to the EU. There is a thought. And I see why you text that. Because I say, what do you mean by addiction? What does that mean? And also, what about that bus? Was that bus not designed entirely to persuade people that we would be better off by leaving? So how can everybody turn around now who was silent as the bus drove around Britain, or indeed who applauded its message about, was it 150 million, 350, I can't even remember. But the bus was a lie. So even if you're right and you never thought you'd be better off, the fact that your team cheated so egregiously and so obviously should make you want to have a replay. Just because you're a decent, honourable man who cares, Des, about social concerns. What does socially better off mean? It means we'll live in a more transparent, a more accountable, a more honest country. I disagree with you, but I respect your view. How can we create a more transparent, a more accountable, a more honest country by letting a massive lie that you knew all along was a lie, Des, if you're telling me the truth? You knew we were going to be worse off, so why didn't you call out that bus? Why didn't you say to your fellow leavers, oh, no, the bus is a massive lie and every politician photographed in front of it is complicit in a con the likes of which this country has never seen before, but we should still leave because of we'll be socially better off? Stick that on the side of a bus, pal, and see if you get 17.4 million votes. There's a sort of enjoyable sense of action and consequence on the programme this morning as we try to work out how we ended up in this situation and whether or not Theresa May bears blame for the mess or whether or not it was always inevitable. I'm also interested in speculation about what will happen next, and it is speculation now, not prediction, because I can say this, all right, and I'll sound really conceited, but hey, if I can't make a meaningful prediction of what's going to happen next, then I don't think anyone can. And my qualifications for that are all the ones I made previously, which I wish I never had. It will come down to no deal or no Brexit. And I tell you again, who do you think was most furious with me for that suggestion? Remainers or Brexiters? Brexiters. The idea that it would end at no deal used to drive them potty. Now you've got an entirely new political movement built upon the idea that it's what they wanted all along. And everyone texted me to say they knew that they'd be poorer. Why didn't you call out that bus if you knew it was a lie all along? You knew there wouldn't be extra money somehow popping out the bottom of Brexit that we could spend on the NHS? How did you let your relatives and your neighbours and your friends, your family and your colleagues, how did you let them vote for something that you knew would make them poorer when they thought it was going to make them richer? So I can't prove that you're not telling the truth when you tell me you knew all along you'd be considerably poorer, 30 years, 50 years, 100 years, depending on which one you listen to, which member of the ERG you listen to. So that's fine. There's nothing to be gained from accusing you of fibbing. But if you knew all along that we were all going to be poorer, why didn't you call out that bus? Why didn't you tell your mum or your brother-in-law when they were planning to vote for it that they were actually going to be poorer? Because they all thought, not you, obviously, you're far too clever and insightful and perspicacious. You knew all along that you were going to be poorer, but lots and lots and lots of people thought they were going to be better off. Shouldn't you have told them the truth instead of staying silent while they voted for the opposite of what they were going to get? Because that's a really unkind thing to have done, guys. You knew all along you were going to be poorer. I get that. But look, here's some people that didn't. They genuinely thought that bus was true. The bus that the leader of Vote Leave, or the head of Vote Leave, Dominic Cummings, considered to be the single most important ploy in the whole of the referendum campaign. He told people they were going to be richer. Now, you knew he wasn't telling the truth, but why did you stay silent? 0345 6060 973. Go on, fill your boots. Bernard is in Veendam in the Netherlands. Bernard, what would you like to say?
No, good morning. I'd like to say a couple of things, especially relating to May.
Yes.
I think that when a deal or a no deal is passed, which I think is probably likely, and I think it's also part of her agenda, because I think these talks with Labour and these proposals that she's made are not really meant to achieve success. They're simply to fill in the time until October.
I think she really does want to get something through Parliament. She wants to deliver Brexit with an agreement or a deal. Otherwise, nothing else makes sense, mate.
I think, to be honest, the only thing that interests her is her own position and staying in power. So she's been very, very successful at that. And I think when in October, if there's a no deal through a default position,
yes,
then all bets relating to her position will be off.
Oh, she's gone by October. She's gone by October.
In a no-deal situation, which will be an emergency situation, and she will require emergency powers. And I don't think all this silly talk of May going somewhere, she's going nowhere.
She is, mate. She's gone. She's gone before I'm back from my holiday next week.
Sorry?
She'll be gone before I'm back from my holiday next week.
How?
How? She'll probably resign if they get single figures
results.
results.
She's going to resign?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really, really children's book stuff.
There's no need to be rude, Bernard.
She's obviously indicated she's no intention whatsoever of resigning. She lost the election, she's lost the cabinet, she's lost it, she's lost that, and she still comes back.
Well, she said she's going to resign.
With the two faces of her deal or no deal.
She said she's going to resign.
She said other things as well. You don't really think she's going to resign in the new situation?
Yes, of course I do. Otherwise I wouldn't have said it. But I've also said that I have no idea what's going to happen next. Oddly,
she hasn't said she's going to resign. She said she's
going to resign.
She related it to deal situations. You're being really silly.
Bernard, there's no need for rudeness. I will ask you one question in order to hopefully make you realise how unfair that accusation of silliness was. Why is the media and why is the Conservative Party currently conducting a leadership election?
You'd have to ask the Conservative Party.
No. Well, they'd say because we're electing a new leader, Bernard. But you said that was silly. So what's your answer?
I say that it's silly because they're not electing a new leader. There is a leader, and she's called Mrs.
So why
May.
are they having a leadership election?
No, they're not having a formal leadership election.
Why have prominent Conservatives declared... Bernard, if you can talk over me all you want, Bernard, but I don't think it's me that's looking silly at the moment. Why are they declaring their intention to run for the Conservative leadership? Why are people assembling camps and teams? Why is almost every page of every newspaper full of runners and riders?
It fills up the emptiness.
Christ, you've gone philosophical now, Bernard. Doesn't fill up my emptiness, mate.
No, but it fills up the newspapers' emptiness.
No, you haven't answered my question. Why are prominent Conservatives like Dominic Raab and Boris Johnson and Andrea Leadsom publicly declaring that they are now running for the Conservative leadership if there is no Conservative leadership election, Bernard?
But there isn't a Conservative leadership election.
So why are they having one?
They're not having one.
All right, mate. No, you're right. I'm the silly one. I am Silly Billy. And you are Clever Bernard. 10:56 is the time. Josh is in Holloway in London. Josh, take your pick.
Hi. Hello there. Yes. So I'm a German French citizen.
I'm just going to try and sort that phone line out, my friend. You're only in Holloway. Could have done better than that. But if I can't understand you, then people listening can't. 10:57 is the time. Couple of phone lines free. You might take a little bit more on this because I'm finding it. What's the word I want? Illuminating? No one's had a crack yet at explaining how Theresa May could have done things differently. How could you could get a member of the ERG in to say, didn't Rees-Mogg tell us he would have gone for the Canada-style deal, and then don't mention that it doesn't include services or solve the problem with the British border in Ireland. Doff cap, tug, forelog, fool the peasants. So what could she have done differently? And if you can't answer what she could have done differently, what the heck is the next one supposed to do differently? Addy's in Wood Green. Addy, what would you like to say?
Yeah, just listening to your show is always interesting.
You've got a great voice, man. I love your voice. And he's got the laugh to go with it as well. This is outrageous. Carry on.
Definitely, I think it's crazy, but I think it's important that the media holds each politician to their word.
Too late, mate. You can't hold someone to account who's being paid £250,000 a year to write a column for your newspaper. Can you?
Yeah, I think that's where it really begins, because I think sometimes they're not really holding, like someone like Farage, for instance. Sometimes when they're talking to him and asking him questions, he doesn't really hold a position.
Well, that's outrageous. How dare you say that? This is typical of all the disgusting things that are going on. How dare you suggest that I should have to answer questions about things I've said previously in the past, or about the funding of my own party, or about the £450,000 I've taken off a businessman who's under criminal investigation. It's absolutely outrageous that you think I should answer questions about my party, my policies, my personal life, my background, my expenditure, my money. All I'm prepared to answer questions about today, Addy, is I will answer this question. On a scale of 1 to 10, Nigel, how magnificent do you think you are?
Thank you. You just said it. That's exactly it.
Yeah, well, I know that.
To say anything.
I know that, mate, but we're not exactly winning.
You can say that. You can say that. I think people need to really see that a little bit. If you hold everyone to the same regard, you're going to get a bit more truth. That's what I have to say, really.
Well, yeah, but I tell you now, the reason why journalism and politics are so entwined, and the reason why the people who are claiming that they somehow offer an antidote to the entwining of journalism and politics while writing columns for the Daily Telegraph or presenting programmes on LBC, it's terrible. I just can't get a platform with my radio show and my newspaper columns and my season ticket on Question Time. I am being silenced. What's that? An awkward question? Then we shall ban Channel 4 from all of our events henceforth, because Matt Fry is apparently the problem in British democracy. 10:59 is the time. A few more on this. We haven't gone very far down the road of what could have happened differently or what was Theresa May's biggest mistake. And if you really want to tell me why, if you are one of these leavers that knew all along we were all going to be poorer, why didn't you tell us when that big bus was driving around Blighty? You know when I say things can't actually get any madder? You'd be familiar, I've told you enough times over the years who my favourite journalists are on different teams. I don't really have many favourite left-wing journalists, you'll be very surprised to hear. I've got friends who are left-wing journalists, but I wouldn't necessarily, and I'm not going to name any names because I'm about to offend half of them, I wouldn't necessarily put them on my list of favourite journalists. Zoe Williams at The Guardian is pretty brilliant, actually, and Marina Hyde as well, of course. But Peter Oborne remains very much, and Matthew Parris, actually, remain very much two people that I turn to with an almost always justified sense of anticipation and pleasure. Peter's been kind enough to talk to us a few times on the programme, and he is, for the record, of course, the Daily Mail's most senior political writer. Matthew Parris is a former Conservative MP who now writes a brilliant column for The Times. Matthew Parris has already revealed that he intends to vote Liberal Democrat for the very first time in his life. And Peter Oborne has just tweeted, "Me too," on top of that article. Now, whether or not that means Peter is planning to vote tactically, or whether or not he is offering up a full-throated endorsement of Matthew Parris's intention to vote Liberal Democrat, I do not know. But the reason that I've enjoyed their work so much over the years is because of two things. Number one, I never knew in advance what they were going to say about complicated or nuanced subjects. I always knew with both of them, even though they write for newspapers that would lend themselves to an analysis of blinkeredness or bias. That's a very lazy analysis. I never knew when I turned the page what they would have to say about a subject. I always derived an enormous amount of pleasure and validation when they were on the same page as me on an issue. But if they were on a different page from me on an issue, then such is the quality of their intellect and their writing that I would begin to think that I might have got it wrong. That, for me, is the mark of a magnificent journalist, someone whose reputation is such that you think if they have looked at the fact and arrived at a different conclusion from you, then there's quite a strong chance you've got it wrong. Okay? It's not a guarantee. It's far from certain, but it's a lovely feeling. Ooh, if you like thinking. And for both of them now to say that they're essentially going to put their belief in the national interest ahead of their party political loyalties. In Matthew Parris's case, as a former MP, that is actually incredible. But, of course, it doesn't matter in the great scheme of things because they've looked at the facts and arrived at a conclusion, and much of British politics at the moment is being driven by very powerful feelings that don't admit many facts. So much so, and I mean no offence by this, that people who voted because they thought we'd have more money to give to the NHS now claim that they knew all along we'd actually have less money for 100 years. And you know, my work here is done. I can only keep pointing it out. But that's an astonishing aligning of political journalism planets there. The chief political writer, the senior political writer on the Daily Mail, hired by Paul Dacre, the man who did more to bring about this catastrophic state of affairs than any other except David Cameron, has now said, as far as I can tell, that he's going to vote Lib Dem, just like the former Conservative MP Matthew Parris, just like the two Conservative Lords, Lord Cooper and Lord Heseltine. And I think Michael Cashman, Lord Cashman, a Labour peer, probably going to get suspended from the party while we're on air today because he's revealed that he's going to vote Lib Dem as well. Michael Cashman was famously Colin in EastEnders, and that's not fair. His legacy should be political rather than showbiz, but hey, we're all kids, aren't we? And that scene with the running machine still haunts me. It's 7 minutes after 11. Back to this collection of questions. Could it have gone any differently? What was Theresa May's biggest error? And what do you think is going to happen next? A couple of phone lines free if you're quick. I haven't had enough female voices today, actually. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. Josh is in Holloway. Josh, let's try again. What would you like to say?
Yes. Do we have a connection now?
That's much, much better, yes. Go on.
Fantastic. So, hello there.
Hello.
I'm a German-French citizen. I came to London for my music production work, and before that to Guildford in the UK to learn about music production, because obviously Great Britain has a great cultural scene and a great history in music.
Yes.
And in the media here and in Germany and in France, I noticed a big difference, right? In Germany and in France, when there is a problem, most of the times it gets pointed to, the national politics is their fault, or like one other country's fault, right? Because we didn't work together correctly with France or Poland or whatever.
Right.
Here in the UK, what I've noticed a lot of the times, not all of the media, but a lot of the times, and also the public discourse, is it's the EU's fault.
As if they're a homogenous force in complete agreement about everything, and we're somehow on the other side of the battle.
Exactly, as if it was the UK as an island alone in the ocean trying to fight against the big bad EU.
Yes, I recognise your analysis completely. I'd be daft not to, but I need to tell you there was a little window in the run-up to the referendum where that wasn't true, because in the run-up to the referendum, one of the many promises that was made was that if we voted to leave, then the European Union would sort of tear itself apart and compete, and the German car industry would overrule the French Napoleonic ambitions. I forget what the details were, but there was the French milk industry. There was a brief window where we were told that the EU couldn't agree with each other about anything, and that was another reason to vote leave. And then after they voted to leave, the EU agreed with each other about everything. But of course, in the context of domestic politics in Germany and France, these tensions are real and present.
And so I am wondering whether maybe, there is intransparencies in Germany and in France, right? And there's intransparencies and a lack of democracy in the EU and in the UK. But I think we should reform No, listen here, Johnny Foreigner. Yeah. Joshy Foreigner. We are reclaiming our democracy by letting 60,000 elderly Conservative Party members choose our Prime Minister. Ha-ha! Stick that in your baguette and smoke it. Well, but yes, you're choosing a new Prime Minister.
That's democracy. 60,000 elderly members of the Conservative Party choosing our Prime Minister. That's what proper democracy looks like. You can keep your elections and stick them where the sun don't shine.
Exactly, because obviously the youth doesn't need to be represented.
No, nor does anybody else. Well, we voted to leave the European Union for more democracy, and that means letting people who've paid money to be a member of a single political party select our next Prime Minister without any national vote, plebiscite or election whatsoever.
I mean, why would you, right? I mean, that would be democracy, so nobody needs that, right?
Exactly. You can keep your democracy. We've got 60,000 elderly Conservative Party members, and we'll let them choose everything in future.
And but I think we can also make this. I mean, actually, that's the problem. That is not even really a joke. I've been out campaigning the last few days for a new European party, and I say European party and not pro-European party.
Yes.
Because we are Volt Europa. We're established all across the continent.
Okay.
And for these elections, we're actually running on the same program in 8 countries.
I didn't know about that. I'm a little uneasy about what the rules and regulations are for you now, having mentioned a party that's competing in the European election. So all candidates, all parties that are running, you can see at our on lbc.co.uk. There'll be a full list of all the runners and riders. So just park any more party political references, Josh, and tell me what you've been learning while you've been out on the stump.
Well, I've learned that actually I've been campaigning in London, and I feel like most of the people actually want the UK to be part of Europe and to be a strong decision maker in Europe and have their voice.
But in London, I think they do. In London, I think the statistics back you up, but there are plenty of places in the world where, of course, they don't. Have we got that clip from Scunthorpe? We have. So I'll play you this, because this is just bad, all right? This is not, I told you so, or this isn't, you see what you've done now. This is just bad. Just like yesterday was bad. Even if you have the opposite view of Jamie Oliver from what I have. I think the guy's an absolute legend and a stone-cold hero. You might not, but the fact that 1,000 people plus are set to lose their jobs as a result of his restaurant business going under, that's just bad. It's not a time for sharpening cudgels or scoring points. So I suppose if I was the Remain equivalent of a Brexiter, I would now say to people in Scunthorpe, well, you voted for it, get over it. But I can't, because I'm not built like that. And my heart bleeds for these people, despite the fact that Scunthorpe returned a massive, I think, and I'll double-check this while you listen to the latest news from the gates of the British steel plant there, it returned a massive leave vote.
And I know there'll be a lot of people saying, oh, he's just using Brexit as an excuse. This is not an excuse. We have lost a lot of customers because of the uncertainty created by the government through a lack of a decision, a lack of a deal on Brexit. This is damaging this business, possibly irreparable. It could cost this business its future. We could be the first casualty of Brexit, but I doubt we'll be the last.
But don't forget that everyone knew that was going to happen. My correspondents today, Des and Kez and the lady in Bristol, was it Linda? They all knew this was going to happen. Everybody knew that British Steel was going to go under. Everybody knew that we were going to be poorer. My question to them today is, why didn't you tell all your mates that the bus was a lie? Why didn't you tell all your mates when they were being told by the campaigners you didn't believe that we were going to be richer, that we were going to do great deals, that we were going to head for sunlit uplands, that we were going to have our cake and eat it? I fully accept that you knew that was not true all along, and you knew that the Remain campaigners were telling the truth when they said we'd be poorer, when they said we'd probably have to leave the customs union and the single market. I know that you voted for the people who your own side said were telling lies. Crikey, it's like the somersaults you must be doing in your own minds at the moment to still support this shower. But I know you voted because you knew that the people you were voting against were telling the truth and the people you were voting for were telling lies. I know that you knew all along that all of this would happen. But why didn't you tell anyone else? If you live in Scunthorpe and you're one of those geniuses that knew all along the bus was a lie, business would suffer, factories would close, you knew, but you were standing alongside people who believed that there'd be £350 million for the NHS. Why didn't you tell them? That was really bad, guys. That was really mean. Because you're the genius who knew all along that Project Fear was in fact Project Fact, and you voted for Project Fear because you wanted to be poorer, because you'll feel better about sovereignty or social issues, and that's fine. I respect that, and I really admire your brilliance, your intellectual acuity, to have seen through your own side and voted instead for what the other side were telling you. But shouldn't you tell people like that fella outside his factory in Scunthorpe who's just lost his job? We could be the first casualty of Brexit, but I doubt we'll be the last. Why didn't anyone tell him? I'll just play you a little clip that's, I suppose it's quite funny. If you had to pick parliamentarians who most represent what's laughably become known as hard Brexit, which parliamentarians would you pick? You'd pick the ERG, right? The so-called European Research Group that is It doesn't do any research as such. It's just a rallying point for Victorian tribute acts and Second World War revivalists. David Davies, the Welsh one, is a member of the ERG, right? So he is about as hard Brexit can get. Here is David Davies being interviewed on Welsh television when a so-called hard Brexiter decided to interrupt proceedings. Just pause. I mean, people who listen to this programme on a regular basis will be familiar with this kind of exchange, but not between two hard Brexiters. You'll be familiar with a so-called hard Brexiter trying to argue their case with someone who is not a hard Brexiter, i.e. me. You won't have heard this before, but this is inevitable, because when all you have in your knapsack is anger and complaint, when all you've got, everything is about what you're against, not what you're in favour of, what you're opposed to, what you're cross about, then you break everything down into us and them, right? It's how it works. It has to. Us and them. And once you've broken it down to us and them and your world still isn't changing, your dreams still aren't coming true, then history suggests that you start turning on people in your own camp for not being us enough. So on the left, Stalin, it's hardly left in the traditional sense of the word, but you begin to police ideological purity. I think of that as more of a left-wing thing. I think of that as an East German or a Russian thing, but of course it happens throughout history. Ideological purity is what happens when dividing a population into us and them doesn't deliver a promised land or sunlit uplands or whatever you want to call it, then the blame has to be some of the people on your own side. This is, I think, a historically valid analysis. Because, look, we voted for this thing, it hasn't happened, it must be the fault of people on our side. Now, Theresa May's at the front of that queue because she did campaign very, very, very flaccidly to Remain, but she did put a tiny bit of colour on that particular mast. So it was always going to haunt her that people could turn around and say, oh, we needed someone who wrote two columns, one for Remain and one for Brexit, and decided at the last minute to back Brexit. That's the kind of integrity and sincerity that we really needed to get more out of them. So she was always vulnerable to that. But that's not going to end there. It will also be the fault of... You could make quite a strong case for saying that the ERG are the main reason why Brexit hasn't happened. They could have got the withdrawal agreement over the line. But this is what happens when they start turning on each other. It's a fascinating little insight, this. Just a woman outside Parliament with a kind of phone microphone strapped to her face. And I mean, this is where we are now.
You must be a Remain. Did you vote Remain?
Actually,
Are you an MP?
I am an MP.
Are you an MP? Did you vote to Remain?
No, I voted to leave, actually.
Oh, I don't know. Why are you acting like a snowflake then? Do you know what a snowflake?
Like a snowflake, but
well, you are, because you got a little bit intimidated by me.
No, I'm not intimidated by you, but you might make false allegations
of what?
against me. Well, I don't know, so...
have you done something to be accused of?
So anyway, that's a kind of... Funny enough, I think this lady's actually on the Brexit side, which is my side of the argument, but basically it's the same.
Well, you're not acting like a Brexiteer. You're being very... Actually, no, if you are a Brexiteer... No, honestly, if you are a Brexiteer, then this is what Brexiteers have been...
Because I campaigned for Brexit. Where were you? Where were you people when I was out campaigning for Brexit? You were nowhere. You're behind your keyboards, now you've come out, right? You were not a Brexiteer.
Oh, you always haven't watched my footage.
I actually was campaigning for Brexit and have been for years, so I don't need to be given lectures by people like you.
Did you vote for their deal?
and they're on the same team, right? Which one gets to say you lost, get over it, if they both won? 0345 606 0973. I'll read another text because it's one of those days. James O'Brien, Remainers such as yourself who fail to accept the 17.4 million voters wish to leave the EU are the reason for the uncertainty and delay causing any damage to the UK economy. We should have left by now. It's a view. You'd struggle to find anyone informed who agreed with it, but that's fine. They could be wrong as well. As I understand it, the uncertainty is built upon the hope that we won't leave. So, in a way, you're right, but if we had already left, there'd be a lot more factories closing, not fewer. So, you know, if that's what you're clinging to now, it's not my fault that we're in this mess that I voted for. It's all the fault of the people who voted against it and lost. Then what happened to you lost, get over it? Did we secretly win? Or did you win and you can't quite believe the mess that you've caused, so you're trying to blame anybody except yourself? Makes sense. Mike's in Beverley. Mike, what's going on?
Hi, a couple of points I'd like to make about Theresa May and what she could have done differently. First one being that in industry, when you are looking to change something quite dramatically, the first thing you do is find out who's on your side, who's on the other side, what opinions there are flying around, before you start negotiating anything with, if you like, the other party.
Yes.
And what she should have done quite easily was have a series of indicative votes quickly before triggering Article 50 to find out where the ground lie. How can you go into a negotiation before you discover...
That's a fascinating suggestion. Do you think it would have washed?
Where the groundswell actually is on it.
But are you overlooking what the atmosphere was like back then? When don't forget how much power Paul Dacre, the editor of the Daily Mail, was wielding, and how enthralled to him. I'm not exaggerating this. Just have a look at who's in her inner circle now. The bloke who wrote the front pages that were so egregiously offensive and wrong, but so laudatory of her. Everything she did was designed to get a nice reception from the Daily Mail. And if she turned around then and said, well, we don't know what Brexit means yet, we need to ask Parliament, I don't know. I don't know that she'd have got away with it.
Well, I think she would have done, because
other
parties were calling for it at the time. Other parties wanted a say. And
didn't the vote leave?
She would have engendered a certain amount of sympathy from other people in Parliament. And
because a 52-48 mandate should have been one of consensus, cooperation and compromise, but it wasn't. For reasons I don't think I'll ever understand, she decided to treat it as if 100% of people had voted to leave the customs union and the single market, which was breathtaking. And I think the vote leave literature said that we wouldn't trigger Article 50 until we had some sort of agreement in place. So the sequencing was thrust upon us. That's when David Davis went out for the row of the summer and rolled over before the soup course had been completed. But the triggering of Article 50 should have been delayed until she had a plan.
Exactly. And then the second big opportunity that was lost was when the Electoral Commission declared that the referendum, had it been binding, would have been declared legally void. She should have declared it legally void and said, you will have your referendum, you will have the same questions you were promised, but we will do it fairly. And if the next referendum is declared fraudulent, we'll have a third one, and we'll keep going until we have a fair...
But then people would feel that they'd been robbed. I mean, look at the rhetoric. The rhetoric now is utterly devoid of truth. It's all about telling people that their grievances are justified, even if they're not. It's all about getting the privations visited upon the country by austerity and profiteering and toxic capitalism, blame it all on poor people and immigrants. I don't know. I think you're being too clear-headed, and politics is about the art of the possible, not the art of the actual.
And that brings me on to the third point.
It's almost like we rehearsed this, Mike. This is a double act. We're like cannon and ball.
I haven't rehearsed this at all. But when you look at what's happened over the whole episode, Cameron called the referendum entirely to keep the Conservative Party together, not in the national interest.
For sure.
Theresa May has spent 2.5 years formulating something designed to keep the Conservative Party together, not primarily in the national interest. Corbyn has danced on a pin for 3 years to refuse to commit to anything, to try and keep his reputation and the Labour Party's reputation intact. And I feel that the population pick up on this. When they're saying that politicians aren't acting for us, I think that sort of by osmosis they realise that the politicians are not acting in the national interest. They're acting in the party interest, i.e. their own interest.
They're also negotiating the impossible. You see, this is the massive elephant in the room, is that there is no agreement stroke deal that will make us in any way better off in any measure, by any measure, than being in the European Union, which is why we're now talking about...
I'm a staunch Remainer, I quite agree with you.
But it's not a question of agreeing. They agree with us now. We are definitely going to be worse off, but they're pretending that that's what they wanted all along. So you're being rational and realistic, but of course the people who are doubling down on the deceits and the unkeepable promises are riding high in the polls precisely because they have given people an escape route from admitting a mistake, and that's probably the most seductive invitation you can ever offer up to anybody. Not just you get to blame others for your own problems, but also you never have to admit that that's what you've done, because we'll keep making you more promises. Just send me another £1,000, Mike, and my dead uncle in Dubai will finally get the hundreds of millions out of his account and we can put them all in your Santander account. We're nearly there. Thank you for selling your house and sending me all the money. But if you just send me another 10 grand, we'll be over the line, Mike.
Yeah, it's wonderful, isn't it?
It is wonderful. It's 28 minutes after 11. Thank you, Mike. 03456060973 is the number that you need on this. What could she have done differently? Do give me a ring. I'm being incredibly friendly today, but I'm at the moment confined to texts which have essentially said that we knew we'd be poorer, but would be better off socially. You can't tell me what socially means. We need to leave because the EU doesn't audit its accounts, a lie that has been completely demolished. Or the lady who sent that in was also cross about expenses, but didn't know that most British MEPs have their expenses independently audited, or presumably that Nigel Farage pledged that he'd get his independently audited 6 or 7 years ago. But he's busy, I'm sure it's just a matter of time. So all of these canards have fallen apart, and yet this emotional desire, this atavistic urge to cut ties persists. And you say, why? And there's not a lot there, which is why genuinely I don't think things could have gone any differently. I think it became clear the middle of last year that we'd end up where we are today, but whether or not we needed to end up where we ended up in the middle of last year, I still don't know. If Theresa May had... See, that's the problem, isn't it? Because pick your favourite. What was the reason that this person gave for voting to leave? I wanted to curb immigration. So she felt she had to abolish free movement. And if she had to abolish free movement, we had to leave the single market. Now, yes, there were Leave campaigners in the run-up to the vote who said that we'd easily be able to control immigration and stay in the single market, but they were wrong. I don't think they were lying. I think they were just a bit ignorant or a bit overly optimistic, to be kinder. So once she decided that the one promise that couldn't be broken would be the abolition of freedom of movement, everything else became inevitable, I think. And yet it turns out that the people most responsible for demonising immigration, indeed the very people who unveiled that despicable Breaking Point poster just hours before Joe Cox was assassinated by a white supremacist terrorist, the very people who weaponised immigration are the people expressing the gravest unhappiness and misgivings about what Theresa May has actually delivered. So they got what they asked for. But it turns out not to be what they wanted. PMQs today, of course, from 12. Theo, I should be keeping a close eye on that so that you don't have to. Inevitably, the Brexit shenanigans continue. Theresa May, nobody has really... Mike and Beverley quite rightly posited a scenario which could have delivered a slightly preferable conclusion to the one that we're currently in, but I don't think it was doable. I think to forget what the febrile atmosphere was like. It's pretty febrile now, but in the immediate aftermath, then if Theresa May had pressed pause or if she'd opened up... I don't know, actually. No, I don't know. And Mike was a brilliant contributor, wasn't he? So maybe... Do you know there's a very strong case for saying that Brexit was not party political? Therefore, the Prime Minister charged with delivering it should actually have set up a kind of committee of national interest, committee of national representation. And if you're laughing at me for saying that, then I would remind you that 3 years later she did invite Jeremy Corbyn into, and forget who's responsible for the fact that it didn't happen sooner. She may have invited him 6 months ago and he didn't come. But that to take 3 years to think, well, maybe we should look at both major parties. So she'd get into bed with the DUP immediately, the DUP representing a constituency that voted to remain, but they're passionate leavers. So the only people that were invited into her tent were people who wanted to leave even more than she did, but who represented a constituency in the context of Northern Ireland that passionately wanted to remain. So, maybe Mike's right. Be like Mike. She could, if she'd had real courage and real conviction and a genuine determination to deliver Brexit, whatever that turned out to mean. And you might not like this or agree with it, but she really, really does. There's nothing else you can say about her with evidential support except that she's determined to get it over the line in any way, shape or form. That's why she's back again with yet another dog's breakfast of a quotes deal, end quotes. It's hoping against hope that this one might get over the line. So with that in place, determination to deliver it, and then courage and conviction about what was possible, you'd have ended up putting together Yeah, you'd have ended up putting together something that retained single market membership in all but name, and that would have meant we had to keep freedom of movement, and that would have meant... You've forgotten now because the racists are banging on about something else. But you've forgotten now that 3 years ago, if she'd stood up and said, by the way, we're going to keep freedom of movement... Yeah, no, Mike, you're wrong. Sorry. That would have broken everything. Anything she did that could have been cast by the usual suspects as in any way retaining the immigration status that we had, and at this point you have to put your fingers in your ears and pretend you don't understand that we could have much more robust rules in place as EU members than successive governments elected to impose. Remember when we first started pointing that out? It's incredible, isn't it? And that would have broken everything. She had to deliver that. It's really odd that if you were looking at it now, you'd think it wouldn't make any sense because the toxicity of the immigration debate has actually gone away. It's really weird. You don't that. You can't quite imagine a breaking point poster being unveiled in the current climate, can you? But my God, it fed completely into the climate then, the climate that saw Joe Cox get murdered. That's really interesting. So now, looking back, you could make a case for saying she could have done things differently, but back then, saying, oh, we're going to keep freedom of movement, Brexit will involve retaining freedom of movement, because that whole line, control our borders, it wouldn't have worked, would it? I don't think it would. 11:39 is the time. Emma is in Castleford. Emma, what could she have done differently?
She could have been honest. That's a very novel idea, but no, she could have just come out and said, look, you were lied to.
Oh, and then she's out of a job straight away. No, then she's out of a job straight away.
She'd have resigned.
Yes.
She'd have resigned. And said, look,
so if we'd put a Brexiter in charge right back then, we probably would be out of the woods by now because it would have all fallen apart and they wouldn't have had the fig leaf of saying, well, if only Boris Johnson was in charge, because he was in charge, then... so what's that then? Hubris? Misplaced loyalty or something? So why did she crack on? Or just ambition?
Ambition, the wanting to stay in power, arrogance, thinking that she can do it. Maybe, I don't know. I'm in Yvette Cooper's constituency.
Right.
And the grief that she gets is just unreal. And it's because she believes that we will be worse off through Brexit.
But everyone believes that. Everyone believes that now.
Yeah.
Keep up, Emma. All the people that voted to leave because they thought they'd be richer knew all along they'd be poorer.
Yeah, but because she's tried to stop a no deal, they are livid with her. But she's done it because she believes that obviously her constituents are going to be worse off. She hasn't done it.
Well, this is, I thought, again...
She's not going to gain anything.
No, but that's what I keep saying. I mean, politicians, it's a slightly different question, but in the context of non-politicians who've waded into this debate, the question of what's in it for them.
Yeah.
I don't get that. Why do people not realise that someone like Gary Lineker, he doesn't have to do this. There's nothing in it for him. Gina Miller, J.K. Rowling, all the. I mean, they did this roll call of people that routinely get pilloried and lampooned. Why would they be doing it if it wasn't sincere? And they might be wrong, but at least they're sincere. The other lot, they change their mind and change their story so often that they make the scriptwriters on Neighbours look lazy.
And so I'll say on Facebook, I'll say, why would Yvette Cooper purposely try to aggravate and upset 70% of her constituents, the people that... And she probably won't get voted in next time. And it's a shame because she's only doing what she thinks is best.
I suppose it depends how it shakes down, doesn't it? I mean, I haven't checked the numbers in Scunthorpe, but the numbers in Scunthorpe were pretty big, I think. They were pretty huge, the Leave vote. And people were told your employers could move, you could do 61%. 61% Leave in Sunderland, not Scunthorpe, but the point stands.
My partner's company has already had an email from work saying that taking voluntary redundancies through the uncertainties to Brexit, and they'd had a gagging order on that as well.
Is that right?
They weren't allowed to say anything.
I think there's been quite a lot of that around. I mean, there were rumours a couple of years ago.
I don't work there, so I can say.
Well, you haven't told me what company it is, and I don't want you to. I don't want anyone to get into trouble. But that seems to be the point. And then they say, I get a text saying the uncertainty is the fault of Remainers. But the uncertainty is hope that we won't do the maddest thing imaginable. And what these people accusing Remainers of causing the uncertainty are calling for is for us to do the maddest thing imaginable. It's incredible.
Yeah. But she could have been honest.
She could maybe have been honest. I mean, I think she was waiting for someone else to be honest. This has been my theory all along, that she was, because she is not a Brexiter, or she was not a Brexiter, so she needed a Johnson or a Fox or a Gove or a Davis to come out and say, whoa, I'm terribly sorry. I seem to have got completely the wrong end of the stick over this stuff. And I think there was maybe a moment where I thought that might happen. Not Johnson, obviously, but possibly Davis. I don't know him very well. But I thought when we found those tweets in which he demonstrated utter ignorance about how it all works, I mean, genuinely utter ignorance, when he was saying the morning after the vote, I'll be in Germany negotiating with the German car industry. Just absolute ignorance of how the most fundamental principles of the European Union worked, from a man who had spent his entire political career campaigning to leave it. Again, in retrospect, should have been a penny drop moment. Hang on a minute. How can we trust anything you've said about why we should leave if you don't have a Scooby-Doo about how it actually works? You can only negotiate trade agreements with the whole, with the bloc, with the market. You can't negotiate trade agreements with individual members. David Davis did not understand that, and she still hired him. Now, you look back and think, well, that was a very odd thing to do. But under my analysis, it makes perfect sense. Because she looked at David Davis and saw a man who didn't have a clue how any of it worked, but was passionate that we needed to leave. She gave him the job as... this is it. She gave him the job as Secretary of State for Brexit, for leaving the European Union, because she presumed that the more work he did, the clearer it would become that he was wrong about everything. And once he'd realised that he was wrong about everything, he would have no choice but to turn to the people and say, I'm terribly sorry, as one of the prominent leading Brexiters, I misunderstood almost everything for my entire political life. It was quite a big ask from Theresa May. Maybe I'm exaggerating it slightly. Why on earth did she give the job to a man who'd proved he didn't understand the most basic fundamentals? Answer, because she thought, as his failure to understand the most basic fundamentals became ever more evident to him, he'd have no choice but to admit his mistake and help her cobble together some sort of compromise. But of course he didn't. The minute he realised just how ignorant he was about how the European Union worked, he resigned as Secretary of State for Brexit, returned to the sidelines and started claiming it could somehow all have gone better. If only. David Davis is a brilliant Brexit, absolutely brilliant Brexit, but it goes to a different school. We only got as far as 3, actually, on this, because you keep hearing the 10-point plan that Theresa May is seeking to persuade Parliament to back today. It is absolute porridge. It really is. It's almost unbelievable what she's been reduced to now. The questions we've been addressing all morning, and I think we'll continue to do so, very simply are, could she have done anything differently? And I think once you remember... This is the closest thing I've got to a proper analysis at the moment. I began the show this morning by saying I have no idea what happens next, but I think I can clearly describe what's in the rear view mirror. And it's easy to forget when you look back, well, why didn't she just do this and that? The answer is she couldn't, because immigration was... There were 2 things that delivered Brexit. Immigration and a promise that we'd be better off. Right? The promise that we'd be better off was on the side of that bus. The immigration reached a level I never thought I'd see in my own country in this era, I'll be honest with you, when that disgusting Breaking Point poster was unveiled. But clearly a significant swathe of my fellow Brits don't find that Breaking Point poster disgusting, because they remain in thrall to the despicable individuals responsible for it. And I recognise that. You can't pretend otherwise you turn into the problem that you describe. You can't close your eyes, stick your fingers in your ears and pretend it's not there. Millions and millions of British people were comfortable and remain comfortable with iconography and propaganda which came straight out of the Nazi playbook, which still shocks me, but I don't see any other analysis of the facts. So on the one hand you had "We'll be richer," that's the bus, and on the other you had "foreigners," that's the poster. So she knew that the bus was a lie. That became clear almost immediately, and she could almost get that one under the wire. She could smuggle, well, you're not actually going to be better off, but Brexit means Brexit. The thing she could not smuggle under the wire would have been any dilution of the abolition of freedom of movement. It's why she so often sounded as if she was boasting about it. Do you remember? She'd stand up and list her achievements or list the big rallying points in whatever agreement she was trying to get through Parliament that week, and she'd say, the abolition of freedom of movement. probably the first time in recorded history that losing a freedom has been sold to a population as a plus. What do we want to be? Less free to move. When do we want it? Well, as soon as possible, please, if it's all right with you, Prime Minister. Less free to move? Yeah, no. We'll be less free to move, but that's a price worth paying because we'll be making life difficult for some theoretical foreigners. And we forget. Because, I put it like that now, and you almost can't believe that you fell for it, can you? Really? I'm going to sacrifice generations of freedom for my own children and grandchildren in the hope of making life a little bit less pleasant for some theoretical foreigners. Yes, that's right. And that's why she had to do the single market and the customs union. Because there's no way she could abolish freedom of movement and remain in them. So when you get to point 6 on this 10-point plan, and it says near frictionless trade but an end to free movement, you kind of realise we've done nothing for 3 years except contemplate our own navels. Workers' rights bill to mirror EU workers' rights. What do we want? A mirror that completely reflects what we already had. Oh, all right. Number 5, no change in the level of environmental protection. Well, says who? What do you think these clowns want? These climate change deniers that are riding high at the moment. Supply chains, UK to align with EU rules for goods and products. Yeah, but we want to make our own rules. Yeah, we will be making our own rules. They'll just be the same as the EU rules. But that's where we were before. Customs options, second referendum, legal duty to get changes agreed with EU engineers. It's just awful. It's astonishing when you find yourself agreeing with people that you find repellent in many ways, politically, not personally. I'm sure they're lovely individuals. But this is even worse than the one before. Of course, the Brexiters are allowed to change their mind. They can vote for it and against it and for it and against it. They can do the okey-cokey with their votes. They can put the left vote in, the left vote out, in, out, shake it all about. You do the Brexit cookie and you turn around. But we can't. We're not allowed to change our mind because that, according to Michael Gove, would be undemocratic. So as they prepare to have their 4th vote on the same legislation, we're not allowed to change our minds now that we know we're not going to be richer. Factories are closing. Businesses are folding. But we're going to feel better once we finally cut all ties, so it's all worth it. Sandy's in Mallorca.
Hello.
Hello, Sandy. What would you like to say?
Well, I've been waiting for about an hour, so I've forgotten most of the things I was going to say.
Sorry, and while you're waiting, no one else can get through, so I apologise for that.
I'm sorry, I'll be quick.
No, you take all the time you want, Sandy.
No, it's just that I think you do a wonderful job, and it's so nice to hear somebody speaking sensible things.
Right, I tried to be quite friendly today, and I hope everything I've said is simply true. The producer doesn't like it when I'm friendly, Sandy. She says the only bits that go viral on the internet are when I start throwing things around the room, metaphorically speaking. But I think it's time for harmony. It's time for peace and harmony.
Yeah, well, don't chuck your toys out your pram today, James, because it's the first time I've phoned in. I'm quite nervous.
Oh, it's only me.
And I love to listen to these things about democracy and votes.
Yes.
But I don't have a vote.
Ah.
So I'm sort of like the Christian in the, in the arena, waiting for which lions can eat me up first.
You don't have a vote because you settled in Mallorca some time ago.
1983.
Oh, good grief.
I came out.
That's a nice innings.
When I lived in the UK, Angela Rippon used to read the news.
Blimey.
So, it's quite interesting.
Yes, it is. And I never really got my head around that notion of you not having a vote on it, despite being still a British citizen, a British passport holder. You've just chosen to exercise your freedom of movement and settle elsewhere in the European Union. It seems odd.
Well, yes. I mean, I could have gone to Manchester, but I went to Mallorca.
Well, the weather's much nicer.
It's just sort of Europe's an opportunity. It's got, I worry when I see the things that people say about Europe.
Well, you live there, you can see it, and they don't, and that's why they believe it, I mean, Spain is often held up as an example of why we absolutely are right to leave, but the approval rates for the European Union in Spain have gone up since we voted to run away.
Well, you've got to be in it to win it. This is the point. So everybody who does have a vote please go out and vote.
Well, I can't say fairer than that. And I'm allowed to endorse that message, actually. There's someone who doesn't have a vote. Doesn't matter how you vote, but that's what it feels like to be denied democracy. Genuinely, not the liars who tell you you've been denied democracy while encouraging you to let... The figure I can find, I said 60 or 70,000 earlier, the figure I've got is 124,000 fully paid up members of the Conservative Party will select our next Prime Minister. That's what getting back democracy looks like, if you look at things from one angle. If you look at them from the other angle, which is reality, that's what being denied democracy looks like. Sandy doesn't get to vote on her own future. So you do. Don't waste that vote, or indeed that opportunity. It's 12:50. A lonely corner of the British media where we deal calmly in facts and reality when so much of the political landscape is quite understandably dominated by feelings and emotions. And you can't underestimate how important feelings and emotions are. It's probably not great to have too much of them in politics, but we are where we are. And the questions we're addressing, like, have a crack at that one, will you? That notion of why has it ended so badly? A suggestion that it's everyone's fault except the people that voted for it to go this way. I mean, obviously that's nonsense. Could the cabinet have behaved differently? Once you decided that you had to get rid of immigration or get rid of freedom of movement, and trust me on this, if you've forgotten, there was no way after that result came in that she could have not pledged to get rid of immigration. That's where the red lines came from. She understood that she couldn't get rid of immigration, she couldn't get rid of free movement without leaving the single market and the customs union. She understood that, of course. The people campaigning to leave denied it during the referendum, but because the people campaigning to remain revealed it, people claimed that they knew all along. Bless them. So those red lines come in. We're leaving the customs union and the single market, at which point the European Union gets its negotiating hat on, seeks to minimise the damage that we're doing to them. They're not really interested in the damage that we're doing to ourselves, except out of empathy and compassion. But the damage we're doing to them, the damage that we do to ourselves also does damage to them. It all became inevitable. So what was she waiting for? Honour to be demonstrated by somebody like David Davis or Boris Johnson. For them to turn around and say, I am an arch Brexiter. I didn't know that this was inevitable. And it's made me rethink my situation. Can we have another vote, please? Well, no. You can have 4 more votes in Parliament, but you can't have another vote in the country. And that's it. And I hope that doesn't offend anyone. And I understand that you have to put an enormous amount of effort into pretending that you knew it was going to end like this. But I would remind you that when I said last year it was going to be no deal or no Brexit, the people who were most outraged and amused, I think, some people possibly even laughed at me, were the people who were convinced there was somehow a brilliant Brexit available. There never was. There never will be. You can change Prime Minister. You can let 120-odd thousand paid-up members of the Conservative Party, for the first time in British history, select our PM. We've had unelected PMs before, Gordon Brown and Theresa May, most obviously, but we've never had one appointed by the members of a political party, I don't think. I'll take a history lesson on that if you've got one, but that's what taking back control has done. It's allowed 100,000 Conservative members who've paid money for a vote on who will be the next Prime Minister. Our Prime Minister will be chosen, not by the parliamentary party. They can put through 2 candidates that goes to the membership. It will be chosen by men and women who've paid to be members of the Conservative Party. They get to choose our next Prime Minister. And this was supposed to be an exercise in increasing and enhancing democracy and or control. You see, I lay it out like this. It's not an opinion, it's just facts. So the bit where we part company is where you now have to put enormous effort into pretending that the world looks somehow different from where you're sitting to how it does from where I'm sitting. Didn't believe the bus, didn't believe any of it. Knew it was all Project Fear was all true. That's why we voted for it. That's where we are now as a country. You've got campaigners telling you that you deliberately and consciously voted for the thing they told you could never happen. And you've got people claiming that they consciously and deliberately voted for all of the things that the other side said. It's incredible. Dino's in Bethnal Green. Dino, what would you like to say?
Hi. I really listened to you attentively. I think you touched a lot of the key words of this debate very well. But Brexit is... I'm Italian, I'm a doctor, I worked in North East Lincolnshire and Yorkshire, in those areas that are now facing, for example, still closures, or in the past, the fishing industry.
66-point-something% leave support in Scunthorpe.
Exactly. I live there. I live there. The reality is that Brexit is about the internal divide for that population.
Yes.
Is people, very honest people, hard-working people with a lot of pride, that have been stripped of their working pride. And to be honest, in the area where I work as a doctor, there were more foreign doctors than British doctors. British doctors would cry at interviews if they were sent to Grimsby. British doctors would not want to go there, would take a year off rather than being sent to those areas.
Why?
While Italian... Because it's a very depressed area, unfortunately, and everybody in this country wants to move to London.
I see.
The glitzy area of central London, where you can date like-minded people and live in your metropolitan bubble. That is the crux of Brexit. And I think those honest people have been told, look, you can throw a rock. I give you a rock, throw it. The problem is many of them didn't realize they were throwing it at their own windows. But they still wanted it out of anger to protest a political system that is transforming these elections again in a midterm election with zero content about the European Union, zero content about democracy, the political system that has driven this country in many areas to have a minority represented and a majority unrepresented, first past the post, while the European elections are probably the most democratic ones in proportion. And what have the media really talked to us about this divide, the growing inequality in this country, which is approaching America very fast?
I agree. Well, the United Nations Rapporteur's report is published today that describes a return to Dickensian workhouse-style conditions. But I mean, these are points we've made repeatedly and passionately on the programme. I mean, you're not telling us something we don't know, but you're telling us from the front line, so to speak, that people who have genuine complaints about their terms and conditions, you know, whether it is...
Well, genuine complaints about the terms and conditions has been portrayed as me jumping the queue. I came from Milan to go work in Grimsby. I loaded my car, I drove across the continent freely, with no barriers, to go work and take care of the health of Grimsby population. And I was glad and proud to do that as a doctor.
Why, Dino?
That's my calling.
Why?
Why? Because my family was half... exterminating Auschwitz, half fighting for the fascists. And Europe made it possible for me to be born out of this enormous division. 70 years of peace. 70 years of peace. And
well,
my generation...
I'm not being glib. That explains why. That explains why you have enthusiasm for European Union. It doesn't explain why you want to be a doctor in Grimsby.
Why do I want to be a doctor in Grimsby? Because it's needed there. Because nobody was going there. There was a job opening, and I went. That's why I went. Nothing else. I have a dynasty of doctors in Italy I could have really relied on in the most nepotistic society in Europe. I decided to sort of refuse that easy ledge and went probably in the least desirable place in England to work. And I'm happy to do that. I'm proud I made friends, and I know this country better than most Southerners who never crossed the Oxford-Cambridge line.
You make a very good point.
The truth is, British people don't know their country, and they don't understand that the media is not even portraying their country properly. So, for example, do you know that European citizens, in the vast majority, won't even be able to vote in these elections because they did not fill.
Yes, I do know this. While you're in surgery, I am trying to administer to the soul of the nation.
Yeah,
Dino.
I know, and you do a very good job. And I really
not as good as you, and it's
with fondness.
Testimony like yours makes us feel very humble. Go on.
You know what my generation is building right now?
Go on.
You know what the biggest party running these European elections across the country is? You know that number of candidates across the continent.
Vox Europa.
Vote Europa. Exactly.
Vote Europa. I only learned that today from a previous caller, and all candidates and all because the British media doesn't fit our narrative, mate. It doesn't fit our narrative. It's a European narrative. All the other parties and candidates are available on the LBC website. I want to talk to you for a little bit longer. You're an inspiring man, a genuinely inspiring man. How do you personally process people who do what I do for a living? When we talk about doctor and nurse shortages being exacerbated by Brexit. Given what you just said, Dino, which I'm not embarrassed to admit, I found very moving. How do you feel? How do you feel when you hear people behind this microphone say, "Well, we should train our own. We don't need foreign doctors"?
I think that every country should train their own doctors, and I think across Europe...
we do, obviously, but they offer it up as a reason why you shouldn't be here.
It's a disaster. I totally think it's a disaster, but there is very complex. I mean, the planning and the number of doctors has been botched across Europe.
Yes.
So every country is moving to the next country, and British people are moving to Australia, and Australians are moving to America. Let's look, though, at history, okay? The European Union and the NHS were created out of the same oceans. People out of the trenches, out of the war, looked at each other and said, yes, we were neighbors, we were comilitants. Now I don't want to see your kids sick and dying. I don't want to see the kids of the German person dying in the trenches with my kids. I want this to be fixed. And that was the investment. That is not in GDP, that is not in economic terms, that is not in any trade deal or hodgepodge idea of treaties. It's in peace. It's in being together in it and looking after each other. As Harry Leslie Smith put it very well, it's the realization that we were our brother's keepers. And that realization is what built, roughly at the same time, the European Union and the NHS. They're probably the two most monumental institutions that came out of the most tragic events.
I haven't thought of it that way before, and the chronology sort of fits. If you take the European Union as having its roots in Churchill's speeches after the Second World War and in the original European community, and then the NHS coming, from the same era. I'd never thought of it like that before, and I'm not actually very grateful to you for bringing this to our attention, because it makes me even sadder than I was already to think about what we're being encouraged to wave goodbye to, Dino. But what about the national condition? I don't want to be late for the news, but you're right when you tell us people have been encouraged to throw a rock at the wrong target, but their desire to pick up a rock was perfectly understandable and natural. How, very briefly, and there's a lot of love coming in for you as well, although Wayne in Basildon has decided to spell your name D-E-A-N-O rather than D-I-N-O.
I accept it.
There's an Essexification of your nomenclature. I like that. That's how we make people feel welcome in the South East. But how has it been so successfully achieved? Because I get very cross about newspapers and media and things like that. But your average punter in Grimsby lobbing a rock through his own window, moaning about foreigners while going to see his Italian Dr. Dino. How have they been so successfully groomed?
When I saw that, the TED Talk, sorry if I'm a little bit tangential, the TED Talk about the journalist from Wales, which talked about how Cambridge Analytica targeted millions of people that were unreached and never received a leaflet, never received a campaign at their door, and managed to convert them to the narrative, let's say, of Brexit. Well, the scandal is not Cambridge Analytica, although it's scary and technologically really worrying. The scandal is that there were millions of Britons that had never been reached by a campaign. The scandal is that in many areas of this country, politics is not done. The scandal is that a lot of these people are forgotten, and therefore they can fall prey to a narrative which is naturally complex. Politics is complex. International treaties are complex. It's our duty as politicians, as individuals, as professionals, as citizens, to have that conversation constantly so that nobody's left behind culturally by the complexity of sometimes not necessarily a very coherent and very sort of honest debate, because I don't think the Brexit debate has been honest. But the reality is that the real dishonesty has been decades of neglect for these populations that were left behind, and they were not listened to, and they were not even visited by a lonely leafleter at the door. I'm not saying that it's 100%, and I know there are a lot of campaigners in these areas that try to reverse the tide, but in general, the big campaigns have neglected these areas.
And that would be sort of post-1979 industrial collapse with nothing being put in place to replace it. And I hate to say it, but the architects of no deal Brexit, I think even Lawson has said it would finish Thatcherism, it would finish the project of Thatcherism. So they're voting to accelerate and exacerbate precisely the conditions that have reduced them to this position in the first place. And even explaining that makes me sound condescending. Oddly, it doesn't make you sound condescending. I suspect because you're a doctor, and it just...
Because I lived in hospital accommodation in Grimsby. I honestly, I've met and seen the population. There is a fishing heritage in Grimsby which is proud. There is a steel production heritage and reality present in Scunthorpe which is proud. And it's not that these populations are not able to deal with change. It's that change has been imposed on them in a completely lopsided way. There are very few countries successful in the world.
And someone comes along, it's like Donald Trump, someone comes along, puts an arm around the shoulder and says, I care about your problems. It's a barefaced lie, but no one else has done it. So what are you going to do? Dino, grazie mille. We could probably have the same conversation, or, well, discuss the same subject right through until dawn tomorrow, but we won't. They'll be joining us to talk us through what's happened at PMQs this afternoon. I've just seen, and I think it's Tim Shipman who's tweeted this, the political editor of the Sunday Times, that... So I mention that because he is one of the absolute dons of the political journalism game. And he's described Marc Francois, the ridiculous little pudding, who often pops up being interviewed as a spokesperson for the ERG when J-Dog is too busy writing his brilliant book about the Victorians. Apparently he's just drawn his fingers across his throat while Prime Minister Theresa May was talking. Is that right? So let's just run through, shall we, what this means. Taking back control. Taking back control. Taking back control means that around 100,000 paid-up members of the Conservative Party will choose our next Prime Minister. The rest of us will have no say whatsoever. OK? That's what taking back control looks like. Control our borders? Turns out we can't control our borders. Because if people don't want to come here, we can't make them. The number of nurses coming here from European Union countries has gone down from, I think it's either 900 to 90 or 9,000 to 900. I'm good, but I'm not that good. I can't keep it all in there. So it turns out that we can't control our borders because you can't make people come here. So you've got shortages now all over the catering industry. You've got shortages all over the NHS, reaching crisis levels, some people tell me. You've got shortages in almost every area of the service sector. So when they said control our borders because they'd persuaded you that you needed to keep people out, they didn't tell you that we wouldn't be able to get people in. So controlling our borders is causing shortages in almost every area of British business. That's what taking back control and control our borders looks like. Having a Prime Minister selected by 100,000 people who've paid to be members of the Conservative Party and having shortages in almost every sector that relies upon freedom of movement. Taking back control, control our borders. 350 million quid for the NHS. No. Because now all of the people who believed that bus insist that they knew all along we'd actually be poorer. So there's not going to be 350 million quid for the NHS. We can't possibly be taking back control because our next Prime Minister is going to be chosen by 100,000 Conservative members. And we already controlled our borders. And they were controlled in such a way that made this an attractive destination for people like Dino, who drove from Milan to Grimsby to treat us and our children and our parents. Theresa May called him a citizen of nowhere. It's 9,000 to 900 nurses, thank you for the clarification. That's what controlling our borders looks like. It means we go from having 9,000 nurses coming here from European Union countries to having 900. Control our borders. 350 million quid for the NHS. Take back control. Democracy. What else was on the list? Can you remember anything else we were supposed to be looking at? It's incredible, isn't it? Oh, and that notion of sovereignty. You now have a pudding sitting in Parliament, drawing his fingers across the throat as his own party leader speaks. That, in many ways, might prove to be the most toxic legacy of Brexit, the fact that it has inflated the pathetic egos of men like Marc Francois already. And I still don't see how, once immigration had been weaponised in the most vile way imaginable, I still don't see how it could have unfolded any differently. But just think about those three things. Take back control, control our borders, and 350 million quid for the NHS. And then look me in the eye and tell me that people who don't think the result of the first referendum should be valid somehow don't respect democracy. Well, hang on a minute. People voted for... No one voted to see the number of nurses coming from the EU reduced from 9,000 to 900. No one voted for that. Are you pretending that you did yet? No, we can train our own. Quite incredible. Karen's in Hyde Park. Karen, what do you think?
Hi, James.
Hello.
First of all, thank you for your show, because I really like it, not only because I agree with most of you say, but also because you don't let people away with lies, usually pin them down. So thank you for that.
Well, that's because all my callers are staged and I talk over everybody until they've been battered into submission, you see. Or it's because people ring in and lie and can't quite believe it when they're pulled up on it. But Carry on. Thank you.
So anyhow, what I wanted to say is you asked what could she have done differently, and I believe she could have changed the narrative of the story if from the very early on said she would have been honest and said, yes, you voted for Brexit, I understand it, I will execute it, but what you have been told were lies. We cannot have it all. We can set our priorities, we can have sovereignty, but then we will miss out on the frictionless trade. But she continued with her red lines, and she continued exactly with the same lies than everybody else. We take back control, we have frictionless trade, we have control of our borders, our money, everything. Yes. So she continued. So, and suddenly 3 years later...
Do you not just... can I pause you there?
She's accepted.
Yes, no, but I'm not sticking up for her at all. Did she have any choice in doing that?
Yes, of course she had a choice. Why not? She could have been honest.
But if she had...
said, I'm willing to execute, but you were not told the truth.
But that's why we need a Brexiter in charge, though, they'd say. I think you underestimate just how boneheaded these people are. They would not have said, oh, thank you for telling us the truth. They'd have said, you're calling us a liar. We need a Brexiter in charge. And she'd have been toppled by the ERG. As she probably will be in the next couple of days anyway.
If she would have continuously over 3 years, she would have changed the narrative in the country. She would have never convinced the ideologists. I agree with you. On neither side. Never. But the majority of the country, I think she could have reasoned with, and that she failed to do. And secondly, obviously, what many people said before me also, if you have such a tight vote, you need to reach out. You need to exclude both sides of the extreme. Okay, the one who wanted to not go Brexit at all, and the other ones who wanted the no-deal Brexit, and find a consensus. Where is the consensus in the majority of the country? Not the extreme side. And she completely went to extreme side just to save her party, and that's her downfall. She only went for the rescue of her party, I think.
I mean, I guess parts of that are correct, but it would have involved either someone honourable coming forward and saying they made a terrible mistake, or Theresa May essentially signing her own resignation notice by telling the truth about... But that's it, isn't it, Karen? That was the deal with the devil. She decided to continue telling... Because she said, we found a clip of her, I don't know if you heard me play it, of her describing precisely what would happen in Ireland. She knew. She understood, and she spent 3 years pretending not to. That's so bizarre.
She knew. And of course she knew. And, you know, I mean, England had the best deal that anybody has within Europe. So there is no way the European Union could have given you an even better deal. Because any other country would have said, why not me? It doesn't work like that.
Well, outside Schengen, outside the Euro, whether for good or for ill, if you're a Euro skeptic, that's the jackpot.
Absolutely. And you could not have had a better deal.
And we could have imposed much more stringent immigration regulations if we wanted to, but we didn't, because we knew that if we did, we'd make ourselves worse off.
But I think one of the biggest issues also, when we decided to include the Eastern European countries after the fall of the Berlin Wall, there was a decision by the UK government to not have any transition agreement. This was not a European decision, this was a UK decision. There's a lot of countries which neighbour Poland and Romania and all these countries who had transition agreements.
You're right. Big mistake by Tony Blair. Yes.
They were also concerned about cheap labour, but so again, it's not a European decision. It was a UK decision.
It was.
And I think
it was a massive miscalculation. They were expecting 30,000 and we got about 3 million.
I'm not even saying it was wrong, but people don't know it was a UK decision. People blame the EU for everything.
You're so
and
right.
The government has blamed the EU for everything over the last 30 years and then reluctantly, campaigned pro.
And that is...
the last 3 months.
Yeah.
And that wasn't good enough.
And it's easy to see why. Why wouldn't you? It's the mother of all scapegoats. As long as it stays a scapegoat, it's fantastic for successive British governments to have either actively encouraged criticism of the European Union for things that were effectively their fault, or to have sat on their hands while the media did so. Oh, Karen, what a tangled web we weave.